So I want you to picture packing a suitcase for a one-way trip to a place you've never been.
Right.
Maybe it's a completely new country across the world, or, maybe it's just a radically different corporate culture at this high-stakes new job.
Oh, yeah. That is always incredibly stressful.
Well, right, because you desperately want to fit in. So you start packing basically blank slates, neutral clothes, neutral opinions. But then you look at your family heirlooms, your favorite local spices, your, quirky habits, the deeply ingrained things that make you, you. Do you leave them behind to just smoothly assimilate? Or do you cram them all into the suitcase, completely refuse to adapt, and just isolate yourself when you arrive? Because today we're taking a deep dive into two ancient texts that argue you're probably making one of these two fatal mistakes. And they actually offer this 1,000-year-old compass method to fix it.
Which is, it's incredibly relevant for basically anyone navigating any new environment today. So the sources we are digging into, they're a fascinating philosophical dialogue between his uncle and his nephew, alongside this thematic essay titled A Vision of Humanity. And both pieces tackle this really intense intersection of personal identity, universality, and tradition.
Yeah, and before we really tear into the material, just a quick note on perspective for you listening. These texts do draw heavily on Islamic traditions, and they reference specific Turkish historical figures and concepts. But we are not here to endorse a specific religious worldview or, take any political sides at all. We're just going to impartially unpack the really deeply interesting philosophical frameworks these sources offer. The goal is just to see how these concepts about human identity might apply to your own life, regardless of where you come from or what you believe.
Exactly. We're looking at why clinging stubbornly to the past or, on the flip side, sprinting recklessly into the future are both presented as traps. And ultimately, how you can use that compass metaphor to strike a balance between holding on to your roots and really embracing a much wider world.
Right. So to understand the solution, we first have to look at the trap. The texts say we're basically all caught in. They paint this vivid picture of the modern world as a vast sea of differences. And within that massive, chaotic sea, individual nations, cultures, and communities are described as colorful islands.
Yeah, the essay points out a fundamental reality of human existence, right? Mm-hmm. We are all naturally born into a specific social fabric. You are shaped by the specific colors, the customs, and the beliefs of your particular island. But the text warned that when people from these distinct islands start interacting in that broader sea of differences, they generally make one of two massive errors.
The first error being withdrawing completely into a shell.
Right.
You look out at the sea of differences and all you perceive are threats to your way of life.
Right, yeah.
So you treat anyone who represents the other as an inherent enemy. You lock the doors, pull up the drawbridge, and completely refuse to engage with the wider world.
Which is, we see that isolationist instinct constantly today, right? In modern geopolitics and even just in local neighborhoods. But the second mistake is the total opposite, and the text actually presents it as equally dangerous. And that mistake is losing all of your unique colors under the guise of modernization or, globalization.
Right.
The essay vividly describes this as vanishing into a colorless void.
A colorless void. Man, that really captures a very specific kind of modern exhaustion, I think.
Really does, yeah.
Because it's that feeling of scrolling through social media and realizing every influencer's apartment has the exact same minimalist aesthetic. Or, traveling across the globe only to find the exact same coffee shop chains on every single corner. You strip away everything that makes your island unique just to blend into the sea. So it's uniformity disguised as unity.
Precisely. And against those two extremes, the isolated shell and the colorless void, the text introduces an anchor image. It relies on a quote from the Turkish poet Yahya Kemal, who states, "We are a future whose roots are in the past." So both sources lean heavily into this analogy of a tree to explain healthy human development.
Because a tree's branches must reach high into the sky, right? They have to stretch toward the future, expanding outward and upward to catch the sun. But those branches can only survive, and they can only reach those great heights if the invisible roots stay buried deep in the ground, drawing nutrients from the past.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if we focus intensely on roots, if we're constantly fixated on our traditions and our past, doesn't that just make us rigid? It sounds a bit like trying to drive a car while staring entirely in the rearview mirror. You're inevitably going to crash right into the future if your gaze is only focused backward.
Well, the texts actually anticipate that exact modern objection, but they view the mechanics of identity quite differently. Think about your car analogy. The text argues that your roots are not the rear-view mirror that you're just passively staring into. Your roots are the engine of the car itself.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, the assertion here is that someone who cannot build their own identity, someone without that grounded engine, has absolutely nothing of value to offer anyone else.
So if you strip away your identity just to fit perfectly into that colorless void, you're basically arriving at your destination completely empty-handed.
Exactly. You have no unique perspective, no specific cultural resilience, no distinct character to contribute to the global conversation. The uncle in the dialogue makes this point really forcefully. He argues that while protecting our inherent nobility, we must look at the world through a universal window. You have to possess a self in order to be useful to others.
But wait, if everyone is fiercely protecting their own roots and, revving their own engine, doesn't that inherently breed tribalism? If I'm highly focused on my specific colors, I am inevitably going to clash with yours. And the nephew in the dialogue actually raises a version of this, right? He wonders if an intense focus on one's own color just leads to selfishness or racism.
He does, yeah. And the uncle's response in the text is a definitive never. The sources present an alternative framework that completely redefines the purpose of identity. They introduce this concept called a race for goodness.
A race for goodness. That reframes the motivation entirely.
It really does. Because in this tradition, having a strong identity is not, a pedestal you stand on so you can look down on other cultures. It's not a tool for asserting superiority. Instead, it's a competition, a race to be the most just, the most honest, and the most helpful participant in society. Your unique cultural or personal identity is simply the specific tools that you use to run that race.
I mean, it's easy to say race for goodness in a theoretical dialogue, but when a new community forms, the dominant culture usually just swallows the minority cultures whole. Do the sources offer any proof that this philosophy actually works in practice without erasing people?
They do, actually. They point directly to the early days of Islam and the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The text highlights a crucial historical mechanism here. When people joined this massive new brotherhood, they were not asked to leave their origins at the door. And the text specifically spotlights two prominent historical figures to prove this, Salman the Persian and Bilal the Ethiopian.
Let's make sure we define who they were, because their specific stories really show how this works. Bilal the Ethiopian was a man who had been enslaved, but he became one of the most trusted and prominent companions in that early community. He was the first person chosen to call the community to prayer. He wasn't told to erase his Ethiopian heritage to gain respect.
Right. And Salman the Persian was this scholar who traveled across different empires, searching for truth before joining the community. And he was actually instrumental in defending the city of Medina, using Persian military tactics. So he was celebrated for his Persian background. The text emphasizes that they were still known by those titles, the Persian, the Ethiopian. They kept their homeland identities while simultaneously participating in a universal community. The essay argues that this deliberate preservation is exactly what creates richness, not uniformity.
This reminds me of an orchestra. I mean, if you want to create a beautiful symphony, you don't tell the trumpet players to try and sound exactly like the violins.
Oh, definitely not.
Right. You don't throw all the instruments into a wood chipper to create one giant, standardized mega instrument. That is the colorless void. The beauty, the universal richness, only happens because the instruments maintain their completely distinct sounds, their distinct roots, while agreeing to play the same sheet of music. So it's like a massive international potluck dinner. The goal isn't to throw all the food into a blender until it's a gray, flavorless paste. The goal is for everyone to bring their most authentic, unique dish to share, creating a rich banquet. That's what the text means when it says universalizing by preserving one's identity.
I love that potluck analogy. And that sheet of music or that banquet table is the race for goodness. You need the friction and the distinct timbres of the different instruments to make the symphony work. But the texts don't just leave this as a, high-level observation about orchestras and history. They provide a real structural blueprint for how an individual can actually live this out daily.
And this brings us to what might be the most striking image from the entire deep dive today. If identity is a tool for contributing to the symphony rather than dividing the room, how do we physically walk through the world doing this? The sources give us the metaphor of the drawing compass.
Yeah, the compass. The essay states that true maturation, like becoming a fully realized, useful human being, requires living your life like a geometric drawing compass.
To visualize this for you listening, picture the metal tool used in a geometry class to draw perfect circles.
Right.
It has two legs connected at a hinge. One leg ends in a sharp metal point, and the other leg holds a piece of graphite or a pencil.
Exactly. And the text explains that one leg of your internal compass, the sharp point, must be firmly fixed in the center. This fixed foot represents your homeland, your core character, your morality, and your spiritual identity. It has to be planted deep in your roots. But the other leg, the one holding the pencil, is entirely free. It's designed to travel across the page, embracing different cultures, examining distant strands of thought, and just interacting with new ideas.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Think about what this means for you in a practical scenario, like moving to a new country or stepping into a completely foreign corporate environment. If your fixed foot of character isn't sturdy, if you actually don't know what your core values are, the text warns that the compass will swing wildly.
Right, because you cannot draw a circle without a center. You'll just leave a chaotic scribble on the page. You'll adopt whatever morals are convenient in the new office, or just mirror whatever opinions the loudest person in the room holds.
But consider the opposite failure, too. If you fiercely plant your fixed foot, but you refuse to ever move the roaming foot, you never draw the circle. You just stand there as a single, isolated dot. You never grow, you never learn anything new, and you completely fail to engage with the sea of differences.
Yeah, the essay is exceptionally clear about balancing this tension. The stated goal is neither to be completely assimilated, which is, the wildly swinging compass with no fixed center, nor to be a source of problems, which is that isolated dot, the person hiding in a shell treating everyone else as a threat.
The compass allows you to explore the furthest edges of the page while always maintaining a physical, unbreakable connection to your center. It's a very dynamic tension. You're constantly moving, you're constantly absorbing, but your core remains completely intact.
We do have to ask, though, what that roaming foot is actually doing while it travels, because it's not just passively observing the world like a tourist. Which brings us to the final major theme of these texts. If the compass guides our actions, what is the actual mechanism of those actions? Like, how do we engage with the other and leave a mark without simply forcing our beliefs down their throats?
The sources answer this by completely redefining the concept of humanism. They don't describe true humanism as an empty political slogan or like a cold academic ideology. They define it as a constant, active search for an opportunity to do good.
A search, which implies that you are vigilantly looking for it, not just waiting for it to arrive on your doorstep. And crucially, the texts emphasize that this goodness is never expected. It is simply done. It's inherently non-transactional. You aren't doing good to get a reward or to win an argument or to prove your cultural superiority in that race we talked about earlier.
You're doing it because the fixed foot of your compass simply demands that behavior.
Yes. And the expert evidence the text uses to illustrate this mechanism involves several specific historical and spiritual figures. It mentions Alperans, dervishes, Satuk Buddha Khan, and Hoja Ahmed Yasawi.
Let's break this down really quick so we understand the context. Satuk Buddha Khan was a 10th century ruler who famously embraced Islam and integrated it with his Turkic heritage. Hoja Ahmed Yasawi was a hugely influential poet and Sufi mystic whose teachings spread all across Central Asia. And the Alperans and dervishes were wandering mystics, scholars, and sometimes heroic figures who traveled vast distances. They were basically the ultimate embodiment of the roaming foot of the compass.
They really were. But the text specifically notes that their spiritual journey was not about conquering territories or coercing people into new beliefs through, heated debates. It describes their methodology as reshaping the human dough with a divine consistency. Their core operational philosophy was that representation must always come before preaching.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How does representation before preaching actually work in practice? Because if you look at the world today, especially, our digital spaces, everyone is relentlessly preaching. We broadcast our virtues, we argue our ideologies in comment sections, and we constantly lecture everyone else on how they should be living.
Oh, absolutely. Modern society places a massive premium on winning the debate. We think we can just find the perfect logical argument, we can somehow change the world.
But this text suggests that approach is essentially backwards. True nobility is found in quiet, tangible action. The mechanism of reshaping the human dough wasn't about lecturing. The sources say these historical wandering figures healed wounds. They beautified the places they visited. And, I mean, how do you beautify a place? You rebuild a collapsed bridge. You feed a hungry traveler. You resolve a dispute between neighbors without asking for a cut. You simply find a tangible occasion for kindness, and you live out your truth in plain sight.
Yeah, they represented their values so flawlessly in their daily actions that others were just naturally drawn to investigate the roots of that behavior. The essay notes that whoever travels and displays the requirements of their noble character, whoever actively tries to soothe the pain, becomes the true representative of that spirit. It's the absolute purest form of show, don't tell.
It implies a deep level of confidence, too. If your roots are truly deep and your fixed foot is completely secure, you don't need to scream about your identity. The fruit growing on your branches will speak entirely for itself.
Exactly. When the uncle in the dialogue discusses standing firmly with your identity, he describes it as serving humanity with your head held high, but far removed from arrogance. It's just a quiet, active confidence.
So let's pull back and look at the entire map of what we've unpacked from these two sources today. We started by identifying two massive modern traps that most of us fall into when faced with a sea of different cultures. On one side, the colorless void of total assimilation, where you shave off everything unique about yourself just to blend in. And on the other side, the heavy shell of tribalism, where you barricade yourself and treat anyone different as an enemy.
Right. And we charted a course between those extremes using the wisdom of this 1,000-year-old tradition. We saw that deep, invisible roots like a strong connection to your past and your values are absolutely necessary if you ever want your branches to reach the sky and provide anything of value to society.
And we learned that possessing a strong identity shouldn't breed arrogance. Rather, it's the starting block for a race for goodness. It's the distinct, vibrant instrument you bring to the universal symphony. And we explored how to physically navigate the world using that compass metaphor. You plant a sturdy, fixed foot securely in your core values, which grants the other foot the freedom to draw a massive, inclusive, and exploratory circle around the entire globe.
Because true identity, according to the frameworks in these texts, isn't a weapon to wield defensively against others. It is a sturdy foundation. It's the engine that allows you to confidently serve humanity, acting not as an argumentative conqueror, but as the world's mercy and light. And you achieve this by finding quiet, daily occasions for kindness, proving your values through representation rather than loud, empty preaching.
It's a really profound, challenging way to look at how we pack our bags and live our lives. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering question to ponder on your own. It's a thought that builds on the mechanics of everything we've just discussed.
Well, yet.
So we talked extensively about the drawing compass, one foot fixed securely in your core identity, the other foot freely roaming, drawing a wide circle around the globe. But consider the physical reality of that tool. As that roaming foot travels further, as it experiences entirely new cultures, heals new wounds, and absorbs new truths, does the tension of that movement eventually change the soil where your fixed foot is planted? Can our deepest roots actually adapt and evolve over a lifetime of drawing those vast circles? Or must they remain exactly as rigid as we found them when we first packed our suitcase? Think about exactly where your fixed foot is planted right now and ask yourself how wide of a circle you're daring to draw.
Oh, man. That is a beautiful and necessary question to leave on. Thank you so much for exploring this philosophical journey with us.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.